Chapter 9. Layla kept calling Ibraham repeatedly, but there was no response. She was deathly worried about Elif. At night, Elif's temperature increased. She was not in her senses, so Layla called the supervisor. They took her to the nearby hospital. The doctor checked her and asked them to contact their guardians as she was not in good condition. Layla helplessly looked at her supervisor. "He is not picking up my phone, and shall I call on the landline?" "I will call them. You stay here and look after her," the supervisor said, and was about to leave the ward when she stopped and looked at Layla. "Do you want to tell me something? Anything important that I should know?" Layla didn't answer, only shaking her head in denial. Her eyes scrutinized Layla deeply, and she shook her head. "Okay, if you say so." Layla took a deep sigh and sadly stroked Elif's hair. She was looking gloomily at her phone when it started ringing. She quickly picked up the phone. "Hello, it is me, Hazibe. Layla. Your supervisor called and said Elif is in hospital." "What happened?" Hazibe asked sorrowfully. "Yes, Hazibe, she is. She has been in high temperature for a week, only taking antipyretics. I advised her to get a checkup, but she ignored it." "Layla, please look after her until I arrive. I am trying to reach Ibrahim and arrive as soon as possible," Hazibe said and hung up the phone. Elif lay unconscious. The IV drip hung beside her. The thin tube ran down to her hand, where a needle pierced her fragile skin. She looked pale and feeble. She turned her eyes away from Elif's face and prayed for her quick recovery. Ibrahim was in the office, shockingly gazing at the pictures and surnames. He slowly touched his mother's picture. A heavy breath escaped him, forceful and shaky as if it had been lodged in his chest. "So finally, it's the time to reveal the truth, the relationship between Mehmet or Eza and my family. But who will tell me all this? Dad, will he?" He put his head on his hands and didn't know what to do. Life had cornered him, leaving him no room to maneuver or make sense of things. The vibration of the phone caught his attention. He picked up the phone. "Ibrahim, come home. We need to go to Elif." Ibrahim looked at the clock and worriedly asked, "Why? Is everything okay?" "She only has a fever, but the supervisor asked us to come. So are you coming, or shall I go with Emir, her son-in-law, Farid's husband?" "Coming in 10 minutes. Something alarmed him. He drove home quickly, took Hazibe and covered the distance of 2 hours in 1 hour. The supervisor handed a lift to them and left for the hostel. They both went to the ward where she was lying unconscious. Looking at her pale face made Ibrahim's heart ache. Hazibe sided Layla and went to Elif's bed, distressed by her pale and weakened face. She was the one who looked after and brought her up after Nihar. Elif also treated her as her mother. "My love," her eyes blinded by tears. "You should have informed us, Layla." Layla looked at Ibrahim with her smouldering eyes and replied, "I wanted to, but she didn't let me. She was depressed. I know there is something she has been hiding since she came from home." "Depressed? But I sent her off quite happily. Was she depressed because I asked her to meet someone?" He stood frozen at the foot of her bed, unable to move or speak. His mind struggled to reconcile the woman he had known, the one with the bright laugh and sparkling eyes. This was because of him. He knew it, deep down, even if no one else said it. His rejection had carved a wound so deep that her body had crumbled under the weight of it. "I have been calling you since last evening," Layla whispered near Ibrahim. Ibrahim looked at her. "I was busy." "Talk to the doctor, then maybe you can make some time for her," she jeered at his face. Ibrahim ignored her tone and glanced at her tense face. "Tell me the name of the doctor." "Ask from the reception," she rudely replied. Ibrahim left his place, glancing at Elif. He talked to the receptionist and she beckoned him. He knocked on the door and entered. "I am the guardian of MS. Elif." "Oh, have a seat. She's not in the best mental state right now. She's under much stress. Something shook her to the core. I already gave her a tranquilizer. Please take good care of her. She needs it. You can take her when she wakes up." After hearing about her condition, Ibrahim left the cabin with a heavy heart. He trudged outside of the hospital, strangled with his thoughts. He had told himself that he was protecting her, his rejection was the right choice, but he had been wrong. He had hurt her badly. He had thought he could bear the distance between them, that his choice was one he could live with. But seeing her like this, broken and fragile, he realized that the weight of his decision had crushed her, and it was crushing him now too. He wanted to go back, to undo the hurt he had caused, but all he could do was stand there, helpless as the guilt, regret, and grief swallowed him whole. He wanted to hold her, apologize to her, undo the things he had done, but he didn't know if he could. He had no strength to face her, but he had to. He was standing downhearted in his thoughts. They took her home. Hazibe cared for her, but this wasn't the Elif she once knew. She was quiet, sad, and distant. Ibrahim couldn't bring himself to face her. Whenever he asked Hazibe about her, she only glanced at him. She tried to read his eyes every time, but failed. It had been 1 week, and everyone in the house tried their best to cheer her up. Ahmet sat beside her and discussed endless topics. Farid and her daughter mischievously wandered into her room. Hazibe baked cookies and always made some mistakes. She pretended to be happy, and everyone knew this. She hadn't seen Ibrahim since that day he drove her off from the hospital. She was waiting for him to come, impatiently, restlessly. She didn't expect that coldness from him. If not for love, he could at least come for their friendship.